Welcome everybody. Looks like it's 3 o'clock, so I'll get things underway. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you here today. Few things that are going by. This one I'll say right now. Abstracts are due this Friday, and this is this thing where a little bit later in the semester we're going to have a bunch of students who give these short talks. It's quite fun. It's often interesting to juxtapose the different kinds of sustainability work that's going on at the university, and so it's a nice way to kind of dip into a lot of different things at once. And if you are a student and you're interested, or if you know of a student that you think would be appropriate, please get in touch with Ruth Hallsworth or me or whoever. Other things that are going by, next week's talk is this really interesting one. We have a new environmental historian on campus and an expert in Canadian history, Mark McLaughlin, and he'll be talking about it's got a cool title, that's it. Talking about the history of environmentalism, kind of with a Canadian view, which is surprisingly relevant to Maine for a lot of reasons if you could show up. And then a little bit later, another slide that's going by is that one of our own, a former PhD student here, Spencer Meyer, will be here in a couple weeks to give a talk, something about conservation. It's not just for do-gooders, there you go. And he's doing a lot of really interesting work on ecosystem services right here in Maine on Sebago Lake, and really fascinating work, interesting partnership, come to think of it, one in which one of our speakers today is also involved. But I'm going to jump right into just let you know a little bit more about today's talk. If you want to go to the web and look up Looking Back, Moving Forward at Mitchell Center or something, you'll find a story about the fact, and I've lost track of the exact time, but about 2.5 years ago, Linda, who writes more papers than almost anybody I know of every form, including op-eds, Linda Silka here, wrote an op-ed about the Mitchell Center and the university's approach to tackling these really gnarly sustainability problems, sometimes called wicked problems. Wrote an op-ed in the BDN. I've written a few op-eds, but mine go nowhere. Hers, within a very short amount of time, she got a phone call from someone in Millinocket, who, by the way, is her pictures in the story, Jess Mass, and Jess said, "Hey, we think we've got wicked problems in Millinocket. Any chance you could come up and talk with us?" And to make a long story, very short, that's how this project started. So I'll let them do a little bit more of it, but I will say that it's very lucky that these two and their colleagues have taken this on. Sometimes people think about sustainability problems as being kind of, we start with the environmental issues. Obviously, they're people and nature things, but we're always concerned about the health of, say, ecosystems, but we also have to be very concerned about the well-being of people, of communities, of economies. And if you're in a place like in the Katahdin region where your paper mills close after having run for more or less a century, that's devastating. And so this is the kind of context in which it's an open question, right? What can a university like ours do to help these communities find a future? And they're going to tell you about that. For those of you that don't know Linda and Adam, Linda's background is as a social and community psychologist. Earlier this year, she won the Rising Tide Career Recognition Award. And the reason for that, as near as I can tell, is her office is like a turnstile of people coming, asking for help, thinking about how you bring the expertise that exists in a university to work with communities and vice versa. So it's students, it's folks from Millinocket, it's everybody, and it's just constantly seeking her out. And so she's become a really important partner, but also a great mentor to faculty and students here, and there are many of you in the room I know who are on that list. Adam Daigneault's more recent arrival to the University of Maine, but grew up in Lincolnville and went off and got a degree at the Ohio State University in economics, and from there to the Environmental Protection Agency as an economist, to one of my favorite places in the world, New Zealand, to work for Landcare Research, and has done just a wide range of research on socioeconomic impacts of environmental policies on natural resource sectors, whether it's about biodiversity or about fresh water or about climate change. But that's not the important thing. Anybody can do that stuff. What he did that was important up in Millinocket is last December he ran in the marathon. Again, almost anybody can do that, excluding me. But he did something that most people can't do, which is he ran with his son Mahe, who was at the time 18 months. Yeah, so trust me, that was the best thing that an academic can do is take their young son and go running in the Millinocket Marathon. They have other members of their team, including people like Aaron Weiskettle, a wonderful forest scientist, and they've had funding from the Nature Conservancy, from the Mitchell Center, and they are building deep partnerships, many, many meetings, many conversations, back and forth with data, with questions that are key to getting this right. So it's really exciting. I'm looking forward. I've been up to a number of those meetings, but I'm looking forward to an update. By the way, I understand that somewhere up in the ether, we have this virtual meeting capacity. So I think we're joined maybe by Eileen Johnson at Bowdoin and Chris Fort at the University of New England. So if you're there, Eileen and Chris, thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. All right. First step is to see if I can actually get this on.
Yeah. You want help with that?
I did it before. Let's see. Right. As you said, I'm a new arrival, so maybe that means I have some technological know-how. Let's see.
Wow. And part of what I'm going to do is keep holding up different resources.
Yeah.
And then I hope you'll come and talk with me afterwards of different things that have helped us and might be helpful to you.
Yeah, so welcome. It's nice to see new faces and a few familiar ones, so that's good. Some students in the audience is even better. Yeah, so David, you stole some of my thunder, so I'll come back with some pictures and things about that. I guess the other thing to point out is David never really pointed about how I got involved in this project. I keep being convinced that I drew the short straw. He went out and asked every other person that had economics after his title in the university, and I was the last one. But actually, coincidentally, believe it or not, during my time in New Zealand, I actually got involved in doing a number of resilience projects in the South Pacific, related primarily to climate impacts. And I conveniently or inconveniently was doing a number of village and household surveys in Fiji when 2 tropical depressions and 1 cyclone came through during the time that I was actually doing all the surveys. So I managed to get this really, really rich data set on how people characterize resilience, how they might respond to it. Some of that stuff somehow got caught into the latest IPCC report, so that was kind of cool too. So they're actually quite resilient communities. So despite being hit with these horrendous things, it's actually the findings that were more optimistic than I imagined. But let's get back to northern Maine. So again, Linda and I are the ones that sort of are tag teaming on this. I think mostly I said, Linda, I'll just blast through as fast as I can, and you raise your hand and jump up at any time, interrupt me, and hopefully together we'll make it work. We've done this in the past. People seem to like it. Let's see if we can keep the good vibes going. So David mentioned that Aaron Weiskettle was working on this. There's actually a whole kind of suite of people that we've managed to sort of pull in and different, because they're doing resilience work either related directly with this project or tangentially. So also in School of Forest Resources, we have Mindy Crandall and Sandra DeRusti-Stone. And then over in School of Economics, Andy Crawley is involved in some of this. And then Kathleen Bell has also been thinking in this space. She's got a project going with Mindy and others, including some researchers from the Ohio State University that are also thinking about sort of rural economies, particularly in forested-based communities. So I've relied on their expertise to help fill in some of the gaps. So with that, let's go. All right, so the Katahdin region, particularly Millinocket and East Millinocket, is essentially at the turn of the 1900s was nothing but trees. All right, and so if you look at actually East Millinocket's motto, it's the town that paper built. All right, so the actual community identity is associated essentially with the paper mills. You know, they've undergone quite a lot of changes. Both mills have since closed, and there's kind of this discussion about what to do next, of which one of them is recreation. And there's been sort of some pros and cons and sort of discrepancies over whether or not that's the right approach. But the thing I do want to point out is that Baxter State Park has been in operation there for decades there already, and they actually work for, 7 or 8 decades in harmony with the paper industry. All right, and so Baxter is basically adjacent to the Katahdin region. This isn't the first time that there's been this idea that you can actually have forest products industry work aside conservation land and basically land that's totally intended for totally different uses. So kind of long story short, I think these two groups can work in harmony to sort of make the economy thrive. So as I said, both mills have since closed. The Great Northern Paper Mill in Millinocket closed in the mid-2000s. The East Millinocket Mill, I think, finally shuttered around 2014. So as a result, Penobscot Ave and Millinocket kind of look like this, probably in the sort of late 2000s. And now if you go, there we go. If you go downtown, there's things like that. So if you can see the coffee shop is there. All right, now if you actually walk by, it looks like this. So really the question is how do you get back from what it looks like now to potentially what it was before, or how do you even make that sort of that downtown kind of look better? As I touched upon, the other sort of big controversial issue that's kind of up there now has been the introduction or the establishment of the Katahdin Woods and Waters recreational area. So a lot of the issues have sort of toned down a bit. It was declared a national monument in 2016. Roxanne Quimby bought the land late 1990s, early 2000s, so it's been under ownership of someone who kind of had more conservation-minded management intentions for quite some time, but it wasn't actually declared anything in 2016. And so leading up to that, kind of over the last decade, there's been a lot of signs that people have vocally said, national park yes, or national park no. All right, and that's actually led to a lot of division in the region. All right, both within towns but also across towns, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Some of the kind of cross-town, cross-community type issues have actually arose from questions on whether where access to the park might be and things like that. So it could actually, some towns could have the feeling that they are have basically less benefits associated with the park than others. But people are doing things up there to try to ensure that the sort of as the park continues to grow, that the sort of benefits will flow to a number of communities. So coupled with that, like I said, the paper mill has been closed for quite some time. It's been bought out by a number of different organizations, and there's also always with this hope that potentially maybe it'll be opened again. I think the latest sort of last few years has sort of really indicated that that's not going to happen. If those mills open up or those sites open up, they're not going to be paper mills. It's sort of the writing has been on the wall. So with that, some other controversies that's arisen. So this article came out in New York Times, August 2nd, 2014, all about basically what's happened in Millinocket. So it's a paper mill goes quiet and the community it built gropes for a way forward. All right, and then shortly after that was written, this consulting group located in sort of the mid-Atlantic wrote this open letter to the citizens of the town of Millinocket, Maine. It was sort of a scoping study or an idea, sort of consultancy-based ideas on what they should do in the community. All right? And so what they did is they were very sort of upfront, very forward, and basically said, you guys got to get over it. Stop living in the past, get your act together, and essentially move on. All right? And if that's probably David and Lynn is probably a good way to sum it up. That might have even been a nicer way to say sort of what the language in this article looked. So fair to say, this got around the communities quite fast, and it irked quite a lot of people. Particularly if it comes to the idea that it wasn't written by someone at the University of Maine or even someone in New England. It was a real outsider, right? And generally the general community in Maine, if they aren't from here, I don't want to hear it, right? And so the kind of and the language in which they put that forward was probably a good example of maybe how not to approach the issue in rural Maine. So since then, with that in back of people's minds, I suggest people are now thinking about what to do with the various mills. For a while, there was this idea that the East Millinocket Mill could potentially be bought out by a company that could then make it a biomass venture where they were going to make liquid biofuels out of that. That since has passed. I haven't seen anything on that in the last 18 months. Right? So there's been a lot of false hope. That's the other thing. On top of that, the Great Northern, the mill in Millinocket at the beginning of 2017 was purchased for $1 by the Katahdin, which is a nonprofit group based out of Millinocket, of which essentially every member of the sort of executive committee is a former or current resident of Millinocket or the greater Katahdin region. And so sounds pretty good. Buy the mill for $1, right? Well, along with that, they inherited the IRS lien of well over $1 million. All right. So, but the hope that comes with that is because these are locals that bought the mill, that they're gonna figure out how to get it to work. They're not in there just to buy it for scrap metal. They're not in there to buy it to somehow have some other random asset on the books that they can somehow take advantage of in their business portfolio. The idea really behind it is we're locals. We understand the history behind it. We're going to try to figure out how we can boost the local community by doing something with it. And so right now they're still in talks. The president of Arkaton is Sean DeWitt. I spoke to him recently. They're still in talks about how to figure out how to get basically forgiveness on that lien. Recently they've also been granted over $5 million grant from the Economic Development Administration. So, but that's contingent on getting rid of the lien. So that doesn't give them $5 million to help pay off the IRS. They got to figure out how to do that on their own. So that's a sort of hold a pattern where things are on that side of things. So the idea is people are moving forward on some of these recreation-based things. Some people are moving forward or attempting to move forward on what to do in terms of redevelopment of the mill. Generally, when you talk to the kind of people at the higher end, who are doing more of the planning or maybe have recreational outfitters or thinking about development, they're thinking about how can the two forest products industry and recreation economy sort of live in harmony. And so there is good talk from that perspective. Okay, so as most of you know, the issue associated with mill closures in Millinocket and East Millinocket is not unique to Maine. So this map here, basically, if you can see it, anything that's basically the red with the crosses is where a paper mill was operating as of 2001 and has since closed. All right, and so there was basically at the end of 1990, 17,400 people were working in pulp and paper industry. Now we're down to just 4,100. It's a 75% decline. All right, so this issue isn't just unique to those two dots on the map. Uh-oh, I'm going to screw up on this. Yep. All right. Laser. All right, so these two dots on the map, this is Millinocket, East Millinocket, Lincoln, Old Town. So this one's going to turn green soon, right? At least according to the news. And this is Bucksport, Madison, etc. All right, so we went from 28 mills in 2006 to 18 in 2007. And now we have 6 in 2018. All right. The good story is the mills that are still open, a lot of them have put in a lot of new investment, changed the type of paper products that they're making, and are actually expanding. So I think, don't go out and just start buying stock in pulp and paper companies in Maine. But I think we've sort of hit that rock bottom, and it's turning around, at least in that sense. And the idea that the Old Town Mill is going to open and be a pulp mill is maybe another indicator that that's the case. On top of that, there's been this sort of growth in land dedicated or devoted, classified as conservation land. So in 1993, there was about 1 million acres within the state. And since then, a lot of land that used to be under corporate ownership by companies like Great Northern Paper have been sold and then put under conservation easement. All right, so there's that other question about once land changes ownership and it's put under conservation, is that going to change the sort of composition of where wood supply could potentially come from, or what the use of that land would be? And so, at least preliminary analysis that my graduate student Jung Heng and I have worked on have indicated that actually putting land under conservation, forest land under conservation, putting under easement, reduces the chance of harvest by like less than 1%. So the idea of that just because land's being classified as conservation doesn't mean it's being taken off the books in terms of availability of wood supply. All right, most of it goes under easement to take it permanently out of development, which means residential type development. It doesn't mean to take it out of the potential to provide forest products. Okay, so that's kind of the grand overview. What are we trying to do with all this? So as I indicated, Katahdin Region has experienced quite significant change. The mill closures, the establishment of the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, this idea that there's new recreational enterprises, of which I haven't even talked about all of them. Linda, David, and I went up and visited another one this summer where similar, adjacent to Katahdin Woods and Waters, they're establishing a whole suite of trails right along the east branch of the Penobscot that are sort of rivaling Acadia National Park in terms of their beauty and their kind of level of detail. So there's just a number of things like that are actually happening there that suggest that the place could really be sort of this next huge recreational destination on top of already what it is with Baxter State Park being so close. So with that, David talked about we have these community partners. We're really trying to think of, okay, before all this stuff explodes and we have all this great growth and everything, can we at least think about where the growth might come from or where we are today? And so they sort of approached us not just with this idea that this is a wicked problem that sort of the University of Maine and the Mitchell Center could help sort of tackle, but also how do we quantify these things, right? And so the idea that we kind of came up with is, well, why don't we use this sort of resilience indicator framework as a way to take a snapshot of the current state of the community and then compare it to sort of previous years, right? So we can use things like census data and other things to look at what these sort of indicators look like in the past. And then really use that to then assess as they move forward whether or not they're making strides in certain sort of aspects of socioeconomic development that they're thinking of. And so our approach is used a mix of these quantitative indicators, but also qualitative measures to estimate the community resilience and also ideally identify options for how the region could move forward. So just as we go forward in our own presentation, let's think about things to consider is how do we actually define resilience? So Linda and I were talking, others have brought it up. She's reading things in the newspaper where they're talking about sort of the latest Hurricane Michael has come through and people are trying to think about sort of the resilience of their community and how to rebuild as a result of that.
They say right in the article, how do we build resiliency into communities without leaving behind the majority of the workforce? So it's really ended up in a lot of different articles.
Yeah.
And this is a town on the coast that pretty much nothing is left. What do they do?
Yeah.
And what could they have done beforehand?
Right. And so, I use it in quotes or whatever because it's a bit broader than just one word. It's this idea of whether or not it's sort of an emerging buzzword in the sort of literature and stuff like that. There's definitely a lot more around this area of resilience, but it's essentially the idea of adaptation and adjusting to shocks, right? I'll go into that a little bit more, but that's sort of what we mean by it. So what do we mean by community? So this is actually an interesting question. Think about, right to yourself, if you say, I live in a community, what does that mean to you? Does it just mean within the University of Maine? Does it mean Orono? Does it mean also Bangor, Old Town, sort of greater Bangor metropolitan area? Is Penobscot County? Is it Maine? All right. And so as we originally developed a resident survey, we just kept using the word community. But then as we piloted, people were like, well, what do you mean? Right? Everyone has a different designation of that. So we actually then just asked them directly, what towns do you consider to be part of your community? We can actually sort of get at that a little bit more in terms of planning. What are the key attributes and drivers of resilient communities? And then how have other natural resource dependent communities responded to large socioeconomic shocks? So I'm going to touch upon a little bit this, some of them more than others in this talk. The other thing is this is very much a kind of work in progress. So we're kind of halfway through, I guess, the original grant. We're constantly in search of just kind of new ideas and new ways to explore this type of information. So we're working with, David touched upon, we're working with stakeholder partners. And so the key partners are, we're actually working directly with Katahdin. So they're sort of on the ground, in the region, sort of outreach type of group. They're also affiliated with what's called Katahdin Revitalization. And so there again, Katahdin and Nature Conservancy are just a part of this greater revitalization group, which is essentially a group of kind of business owners, local community politicians and planners, and community groups, all that kind of come together and said, regardless of where we think the community should go, let's get together and just sort of figure out different strategies and help coordinate sort of other activities within the region so that, again, we're not competing with each other, but we're collectively working together. Okay, so what do we mean by resilience? So essentially all it really is, it's a way to evaluate a society's capacity to adapt to challenges before and after a shock or disaster. So the example Linda that gave, that's essentially a natural disaster, right? You knew it was hurricane season, but you had no idea how big a hurricane was going to be or where it was going to go, right? So you can only do so much planning, all right? Shocks can also be in the form of economic shocks, and they can come to different degrees. So in retrospect, everyone saw the writing on the wall that probably the pulp and paper industry was in decline. Some people prepared for it better than others. Some people are dealing with it better than others, right? And so we'll kind of touch upon that. So just a couple kind of quick academic sort of approaches. One from Quigley et al., 1996, so one of the first sort of papers that looked at the idea of resiliency. Community resiliency can be defined as adaptability, the capacity for humans to change their behaviors, economic relationships, and social institutions such that economic vitality is maintained and social stresses are minimized. And then Varghese et al., 2006, basically it's a community's ability to maintain, renew, or reorganize social system functions and ecological functions, and it can measure the robustness and buffering capacity of a community in a changing system. All right, so it's really just another word for adaptation, right? So what do we mean by resilience? So let's think about a lot of the things I'm using in this kind of interchangeably. I'm using resilience, community, socioeconomic. Really what I'm looking at in this project, we're trying to investigate sort of responses to economic shocks or economic downturns. And so really an economic shock is the event that produces a significant change within the economy, such as the changing of a mill. All right. It can be unpredictable and it can impact supply or demand. All right. So you can have a hurricane come through and wipe out all the timber, right? So that's sort of a supply side.
So
right?
Florida loses another life and 1.3 billion in timber as a part of it.
All right. So again, coming back to Hurricane Michael, that was an unintended, or unknown shock. Probably one, at the start of the season when they were doing timber harvest plans and things like that. But that's going to lead to potentially glut of wood to some degree because you got to salvage it all. But at the same time, it's the quality is not going to necessarily be what it was. Or the other people around who maybe weren't affected by the hurricane are now going to be affected by this as well. So it kind of has these kind of flow-on effects as well. On the demand side, it's the idea that basically no one wants to use a phone book or read a newspaper anymore. Although I'm happy that Linda at least brought her paper copy of the Portland Press. So. Okay, so then.
Oh, can I say one quick
Yeah.
thing about that? When I was buying paper recently in downtown Orono, the person who was waiting on me said, "I don't know how to bring this in. Is this a newspaper? I've never read a paper newspaper."
Right. Nice. All right, so what happens after? I do both. But I'm in that middle sort of. I don't know. I'm the thing I was born between 78 and 82. We don't have any. We're not Gen X or Gen Y or whatever. There's another thing that we are because we grew up in an analog. We were born in an analog era, but then we grew up in a digital era. So anyway, let's get back on track here. So what happens after experiencing this shock? All right, you can return to normal. All right, and so you get over it. The trees grow again. You figure out how to just continue on. All right, you fall apart. All right. Trees fall over, you let them die in the woods. You say, forget this, I'm going to go, work at the mall. All right, and then you grow stronger, you adapt. All right, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to go in the woods, I'm going to clean that stuff out, I'm going to find the best markets possible, and then I'm going to replant another species that I think is more valuable and essentially actually more resilient to shocks, something like that. So another way to think about it is, let's think we have another number of communities before a shock. All right, and they're plodding along. This is over time, things are all going great. Mill's at full operation. Then, some shock happens, all right? And that has a total impact on how things operate. And so how are people going to adapt? So initially it can kind of go two different ways, right? Some of them might figure out how to go sort of faster. Some of them might swerve this way, swerve that way. And so what you could do is, again, Group A could continue to be a single sector economy, and that could be new or previous sources of development. So this is the idea that you could still be a timber-based economy, but instead of doing pulp and paper, you're going to do these liquid biofuels, or you're going to do pellets. All right. Others figured out, okay, we got to become more diversified. Maybe instead we're also going to figure out how to do a recreation-based economy. Maybe we have lots of water resources, and we figure out something to do with that, like build a salmon farm. All right, and maybe come up with new sources of development. But then you notice there's a couple more that are stuck in the shock, right? And those are the ones that they don't know what to do. They're still floundering, all right? So these are sort of three groups that you can kind of think about how to classify what that is. So bringing this back to thinking about resilience, we can think the concerns include things like attracting, retaining business and jobs, building the tax base, it's a huge concern up there, addressing poverty and inequality, enhancing local amenities, and producing some sort of economic sustainability, all right? So it's just some sort of consistent flow of goods and services over time.
And just to add to that, there's some really interesting new research that was just reported 2 days ago, work at Harvard and some other places, that job growth is found to be no cure for a community's poverty. So they're doing this opportunity atlas, and they're really looking at the assumptions we're making that just because you have job growth, it's going to help the community. And so there's going to be a need for people like you to help us think about the complicated nature of whether there's a relationship between if you have jobs in an area, whether that's going to help everybody.
So I'm going to go through this because we're running out of time. So what I do want to kind of focus upon, though, is then, I've given these sort of broad things. This is sort of what resilience is. But the next question is, how do we measure this, right? And so sort of one thing that's emerged more in the natural disaster literature has been this idea of these bricks. So it's baseline resilience indicators for communities. And so this is by Susan Cutter and others out of the University of South Carolina. Sort of developed this process based on empirical research with sort of solid conceptual but theoretical underpinnings. And what they've done is at the county level for the entire U.S. is they've basically looked at 30 public and freely available sources that comprise 49 different indicators associated with 6 domains. So it's looking at across social, economic, housing, institutional, community, and environmental. And so we sort of said, let's use this as a similar framework. Let's build out more of the social and economic indicators. And then also, this is all available at county level, but not all of this is available at the sort of census sub-county, sub-district, micro level. All right, so let's also kind of see what else we can find that can allow us to sort of measure this across different towns. All right, this is just another kind of list that people looked at, what type of indicators, things like percent employed, business size, income, equality, things dealing with insurance, home ownership, single sector dependence. So if you look at the proportion of any sort of what the census would define as like different sectors or industries, sort of the idea is that the more that you have in one industry, the less resilient you are, because if something happens to that industry, where else are people going to go? There's a number of ones like that. So what we've done is then bring it all together into this really, really long list. All right. And so instead of going through this all, what I'm going to do is go through an exercise to show how I've compiled this for the different towns of the Millinocket region. And so just to bring the Cutter work together, this is what they've done is essentially estimated, put those 8 indicators together and looked at, basically developed an index where it's like low and high. And high is essentially if it was all equal to 1 or close to 1. 0 is low as if it's all equal to 0. And again, shows that sort of the higher resilience cases tend to be sort of in the central and eastern part of the U.S., little bits of California and stuff, but the low is really hitting a lot of the Rockies and parts of the South and West Virginia, Appalachia, things like that, and parts of Maine. But again, this is county level. So the issue associated with county level is that, so what county are we in here? Penobscot. And what county is Millinocket in? Penobscot. Right? And so if you look at county level stuff, you might say, we're doing fine, right? Because Orono and Bangor are still like an economic hub. And, with the university around, you're sort of always generating sort of employment and ideas and things like that. So when you combine all that together, you don't necessarily get the most clear story. So our approach is 3-stage, develop these economic resilient indicators or ERIs for Katahdin Region and then compare them to other parts of Maine and the US. But on top of that, that's just sort of like the researcher sitting back collecting a bunch of stuff, right? And then thinking, okay, this is good information. On top of that, we also want to conduct qualitative survey, basically conduct a qualitative survey, get residents' perceptions on how things are and ideas and where the communities can improve. So this is building upon what they know and what they think. So we might say like, it looks like poverty is really high and no one's making any money. And we go talk to them and they're like, well, whatever, I'm retired and my pension, believe it or not, the mills don't exist, but I have my pension. And I really like that there's nobody else here, right? And so they might actually say their overall well-being is great, right? And so you kind of have to look at that sort of how those things kind of ebb and flow in terms of that thinking. And then we also just sort of, in a way of kind of coming back to one is in looking at sort of where other parts of the U.S. have rebounded to these major economic shocks, particularly in natural resource dependent communities. And then combined, we kind of use this framework to guide where Katahdin could go, all right? The other thing I want to say with our approach is basically we constantly, and David touched upon this, we're constantly sharing drafts and thoughts with stakeholder partners and community members at all stages of the project. So this is, Linda and I went up and gave part of a talk hosted by the Katahdin Revitalization Group. Former Representative Mike Michaud was the MC, he's sort of there to the right. And then Adam Burke is basically doing some community visioning type process up there as well, sort of parallel to what we're doing. So the 3 of us gave a talk David's in there somewhere as well. But the idea is the next stage, I'm going to go through all these indicators. I went up there, I gave it to them, and the people told me just be as cut and dry as you can and just be as honest as you can, right? And you'll see some of the things I gave, I'm like, no, this is going to, they're going to come at me and say like, what do you know now in Orono? You're really ticking me off by claiming that we're not doing any good. And a lot of them stood up and said, these are too good, right? We're actually doing worse. That number should be this, that number should be this. How can we think about it that way? And another group said, this is great because we can then use this to get community development grants. All right, and so can you give us the information? Because now we can write these grants to show basically how sort of how far back we are and as where we want to go. So there's sort of some things like that. Building off of the Mike Michaud case too, he actually contacted me yesterday and said, if anyone knows, so he's former representative of the 2nd District, former employee at Great Northern Paper in East Millinocket, and currently running for town select board in East Mill. So he's coming out of retirement, and so maybe he's going to use some of our indicators as a way to, part of his campaign. The second one is exactly that. So you not just go talk to people, you figure out how to get involved, right? And so this is a picture of me running with my son Mahe last December. So one of these sort of new initiatives that they had in Millinocket is they have a free marathon. So you don't pay any entry fee. The idea is instead you go, people come from all over now, you go and whatever you pay on the fee and then some, you just give directly to the local communities. It's basically spend, don't waste it on the kind of on the fees. Instead just come up here in the middle of December when not much else is going on and spend away. All right. I realized halfway in this presentation, maybe some of you don't know exactly what we mean by Katahdin Region. So Katahdin, keep driving, growing up I-95 for another hour or so, get off at Medway. All right, either drive towards Baxter, all right, or keep going and then get off at Sherman, Stacyville, Patton, and then the first stage of the project did not include Island Falls. Island Falls saw sort of what we're doing, and they basically said, can we be part of the project too? So I hadn't gotten too far, and I said, yeah, not a problem. So there's 8 towns, and then that we have kind of quantitative indicators for, and there's a few towns there where people have, of these townships that people have weighed into on the survey side of things. All right, so quantitative ERIs, what the heck are these things? So basically what they are is an index where you get a resilience score between 0 and 1. All right, and what it is taking every single individual indicator in that list that I provided. What you do is you need to normalize it, figure out how to get an orientation such that anything, essentially, because if you have unemployment rate of minus 10% and unemployment of minus 3%, well, the minus 10%, the number is higher, right, but it's not better. So you need to get it so that it's all set up so that every time you get something closer to a 1, right, something's higher that actually has basically a heavier weight towards a positive resilience score. So we do that is to do it individually. Then you can lump into these sort of different subcategories, and then you average across all of them. And so I'll kind of present, it's a way to distill all this information that I'm going to give really, really fast into sort of 1 or 2 tables. All right, so in case you haven't already figured out, I'm kind of enthusiastic when I speak and energetic. Now I'm going to get really fast, all right? So if you're a kid and you had to sing along in song or think about karaoke, you follow the bouncing ball or whatever, just look at the red text on these next sort of 20 slides and you'll be fine. All right, yeah, don't worry. We'll distill this down at the end to this sort of 1 table. All right, so where do I get the data from? It's all from publicly available sources. A lot of it's with census, others provided by the state. I got some stuff from the Department of Education too, things like how many people are on reduced and free lunch, things like that. It's other indicators of poverty that sometimes don't come up in the census. Limitations, most annual data is based on surveys. It's not the entire population, so the census is only once every 10 years. This American Community Survey does do a subsample of the population every year, and so we take sort of averages over 5 years to get at that. And as you get smaller in terms of size of town or municipality, the greater the degree of uncertainty around it. And so I've developed all these fact sheets. I'll give you the reference at the end to find them. We have more on the uncertainty around all this in that. Okay, so population has declined significantly between 1970 and 2015. All right, people are leaving the region. All right, upwards of essentially. So just quickly understand how to read these. All the ones in blue are the individual towns. All right, And then as you go over, I have Katahdin Region. I compare that Penobscot County, Aroostook County, Maine, and for some of them also the U.S. All right. So most of the blue population is going down. All right. It's also going down in Aroostook County. All right, but population has indeed actually gone up over the last 45 years in Maine and Penobscot County. All right. And the residents who are left are generally older than they were 15 years ago. We have a lot of 65 plus living in that region. All right. Median age in the Katahdin region is over 50. All right. Comparatively, U.S. is 37, and Maine, which is an old state, is 44. So Katahdin are even older than the average Mainer. All right. You guys are helping keep us down in Penobscot County in terms of 41.6. So thank you. Regional household income is comparatively low, and average real income in the region has declined in more by comparison. The interesting fact here is that regional income, if you actually adjust for inflation, is down everywhere. All right, so technically you made more in 2000 than you did today if you were doing the same exact job and adjusting for inflation. But average poverty levels are not that different than other areas. However, there's a high proportion of K-12 students receiving free or reduced lunch than the average school in Maine, about 10 to 15% higher for all the different schools. And this finding is consistent across school districts. Unemployment rates in the region have increased across the board, but labor force participation is still relatively low no matter which way you cut it. All right, so this is basically anyone aged sort of 18 and older, whether it's technically eligible to work. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female or together, all right? There's just really low labor force participation in that area. All right, part of it is because people are older, but then there's still quite a lot of people that are technically within that sort of 18 to 65 age that are not working. All right, and the people at the meetings tell me that frequently. They're like, this is not because of retired people, this is because there's other people that should be working that aren't. Females are not leaving the labor force at the same rate as males, though. All right, so you guys are keeping up your end. And the region also lags in terms of population with the higher education, which it's only 11%, whereas Maine is 29%. All right, so old people, relatively undereducated people by at least this context, and people not really working. Housing values are relatively low, but occupancy rates are generally high. So people that are moving, they're like to move there because you can buy a house for $70,000. And the changes in home values is highly variable. So in the areas, the corridor of the paper mills, they've been going down. The corridor closer to sort of other recreational and sort of northern type amenities is going up. And municipal valuations have definitely gone down over the past decade. This is a huge issue there because what's happening is that all those valuations go down, but you still need a fire department. All right, what do? You need to increase your tax rate to get that same amount of revenue to run those. All right, and so as a result, tax rates have definitely gone up. Millinock and East Millinock, I think, have the two highest tax rates in Maine. But they've at least gone up everywhere else. So they can complain about taxes, but the rest of Maine can complain about taxes too. All right, so I basically went through and talked about this and brought this all together. Looks great if you have some time, right? But it's kind of hard to distill what this means. So what I've done is basically try to put together these indicators. They're saying, what does this mean in terms of relative across the different categories? So in terms of population for 2016, all right, so the greener means the more resilient they could potentially be because of the way that the indicators are developed. So the U.S., again, by sort of definition, they have the broadest population, so that's going to, it's often going to help them. They're smoothing out a lot of sort of issues within that. But comparatively, Katahdin and Aroostook County are much lower on almost every category when it definitely comes to age, education, income. What I've done is I've highlighted all the ones where the indicators basically in the lowest quartile, all right, in red, and the highest quartile is in green. So that kind of shows that across the board, there's a lot of things within the region that are not looking good. It's not necessarily weighted down by one or the other. How does that compare to 2010? Well, the numbers on the bottom have gone down. So this is now it's gone down from 0.38 to 0.32. It's relatively consistent across the two metrics. I'm working now to go back to 2000 and 1990 to really figure out what that is too. I think that most of the big shocks have happened prior to 2010. So if you want to try to really look at big jumps, you'd have to go back further. This is just a way to sort of, again, do comparative across the two ones. So in blue is 2010, red is 2016. So generally, most of them have gone down, with the exception of housing. So that means I think it's driven more by occupancy rates. And then again, this is just compares across the two. So as you go kind of Katahdin, Penobscot, Aroostook, Maine, and USA, just another way to visualize that sort of where the relative standing is. So bring all that together, you say the region right now as it currently stands, or even as in 2010, not very resilient. A lot of indicators not looking in their favor. So, we'd sit back and say, okay, you're not very resilient, but then you got to go, well, why or what to do about it? So the next thing we did then is we developed a qualitative survey, all right, to then ask residents basically, what is their perception of what's happening? So methods, we administered it June to September 2018. It was internet-based with a paper copy upon request. So I basically put my number out there, said, give me a call. Probably got like 15 or 20 people called. We also sent a postcard with information to all households. There were 3,600 households that got this. It takes approximately 15 minutes to create, and it's predominantly Likert scale questions about community perception. But we also had some open-ended questions at the end about what works and what doesn't. And so the key questions we had are like a list of community characteristics, and they would say like, my town has like good natural amenities, and you do anything from strongly disagree to strongly agree. We sort of asked that down. Services and opportunities would be like, it has the right sort of broadband internet or access to communications and stuff. How prepared they are to the town is to react to economic downturns or natural disasters. Basically, ideas about sort of how different changes to the region have affected economic development, or how they think certain improvements or things could be implemented, and then also just getting at sort of how they live. So we kind of, this last one I had a hypothesis, or maybe everyone there just doesn't want any people around them and they just want to be hermits that live in log cabins, versus there's other people that want to basically create, a new Bend, Oregon or something like that around where they have all these other things and people and apartments and stuff like that. So it was a way to sort of get at that aspect. Survey had about currently 248 responses. Predominantly the orange is spread over Millinocket, and we had a kind of smattering across the other towns. Millinocket had an overrepresentation. I think generally they're more involved in just trying to figure out what else to do. So they're more drawn to want to answer these surveys and stuff. But we had decent enough sample in terms of cross population. More people had a college degree and made more money than the average person as well. So some of the results could be skewed by that aspect. Okay, so we asked something like pretty close to 50 to 70 of these Likert type questions, and then it distilled it down to sort of, these are the ones that everyone, for the most part, 75% or more said they agreed or strongly agreed on the statement. All right, and these were the ones that were overwhelmingly positive. I will always call the Katahdin region my home. I feel a sense of belonging in my town. I'm proud to live in my town. People in my town help each other, and I am not resistant to change in my town. So this last one was quite interesting, all right? Because a lot of times, in the communities I grew up in Lincolnville, all right? I just remember my mom, every time she'd come back for some parent-teacher meeting where she's like, these people don't want to do anything. They don't want to listen to anyone. They just want to continue to have it be what it was in 1850 or whatever, right? I think now it's generational change. It's changed since. But I really realized, I grew up with this idea that everyone was resistant to change. And I think there's other communities in Maine where people, if you grew up in them, you probably have that same feeling. But it seems to be at least the people that responded, so there might be selection bias, they're looking at that. Okay, what else? Think about natural resources. My town has outstanding natural features, easy access to natural resources, and also easy access to public land. All right. So the idea here too was, is there concern that Katahdin Woods and Waters and Nature Conservancy and things like that, they're coming in and buying up this land, or they're taking this over, and is there concern associated with potentially kind of use of that land? And I think these were like 90% plus strongly agree. All right. And so there's general consensus about what the real kind of general consensus about things up there, and it's all about basically there's really, really nice natural amenities up there that everyone can use if they want. Okay, so now we're going to think more about other aspects about economic development. Statements are overwhelmingly positive. I am supportive of new businesses. My town has unique economic opportunities. Seeing more business and activity in my town center is important to me. And so remember I showed you that picture of Penobscot Avenue with the boarded up windows? So a lot of people are cognizant that when you drive around these towns, they're not pretty and there's not much happening. And so that's a concern that people from here go up to Baxter, they just drive right through them because they don't want to stop or don't think there's anywhere to stop. And they think that key way is to sort of bring more activity to that town center and make it look more vibrant. Might encourage more people to want to hang out. Broadband high-speed internet is instrumental to the future prosperity of my town. There's big initiatives there to try to figure out how to get this going. Another Portland Press article just this weekend was about broadband in rural Maine. They used snippet, they kind of did like sort of random top 10, random top lower bottom 10 in terms of internet speeds. Orono has like 27 megabits per second. That was one of the top. Millinocket has 5. It was like one of the bottom 5. All right. And so if you hear people, they're like, I'd love to live here, right? But I can't get my internet to work, or I don't have any access to that. So how am I supposed to do what I'm supposed to do, right? So, okay. Healthy forest product sector in Katahdin Region is important to my town's well-being, all right? But outdoor recreation and tourism is also important to the economic future of my town, all right? So most of them agreed on this, both of them together. All right, but there were still statements for room for improvement. There are high rates of drug alcohol abuse in my town. That's a concern of most rural American towns. I cannot purchase most of what I need into my town. So people are like, I got to drive to Bangor once every 2 weeks to get really what I need. My town is not prepared for future economic downturn. So this has to do with resilience. My town does not have the financial resources to solve its problem. That has to do with basically dwindling municipal valuations and having to figure out how to raise the tax base. There are not good work opportunities available to people who live in my town. I'm concerned about the quality of education available to children in my town. And these together have a big issue associated with, I am concerned about my town's ability to attract young people. You can have all these beautiful things, but if you have no internet and no way to attract people to want to actually live and recreate there, then you're stuck. All right? And then in addition, I'm concerned about people leaving my town to live elsewhere. But the other interesting thing they said is, I think it was one of the last questions we asked. They said, overwhelmingly, my town is not better off today than it was 20 years ago. All right? So people are recognizing that around late 1990s, the region was largely better off in their mind. If you asked about what their town would be in 20 years, it's like 60 to 70%, though. I think it was just underneath the threshold of what I said to most people agree. They're optimistic about the future, though.
We should leave time for people.
Yeah, so I think we're pretty much there. I'm going to touch upon one other aspect. And I talked about community, right? And so this other question I asked is because we weren't really sure. We thought we knew what people thought about community. So, but then we realized maybe we didn't. So we actually went directly and asked, please select which towns in the Katahdin region you consider part of your community. Select all that apply. All right, and so what we have here is basically along this axis. So this is where do they reside and where do they think is part of their community. All right, so along the x-axis, well, some people that live in East Millinocket somehow didn't think it was part of their community. But besides that, you see this clustering of those. This is in the northern part. All right, generally clustering between 30 and 50% think that other towns around them are part of it. And then you see this clustering down here, sort of around the Route 11 corridor that also says that they're part of the community. But very, very infrequently did anyone from Millinocket think that anybody sort of north of sort of Route 11 or whatever, that corridor that you do when you get off of the interstate, was part of their community. And so it really shows this north-south divide, all right, in terms of when you're trying to bring everyone together under some sort of consensus plan. It's pointing out that there could be some potential conflict with that. Yeah, so I think we're going to leave it at that.
So here's what we want to know from you. It's not the answers to all these things, but given what you're studying or what you do for a living or your area, what would you do in terms of building a partnership with the Katahdin area? What do you see as the real potential? Because one of the first things that people up there said is we're not sure that the University of Maine can be helpful in any possible way. But we can be. Not by solving people's problems, but by building partnerships. So what would you do? Bree, what would you do? Or Amanda, what would you do? People who are thinking about, you're a librarian, what would you do? So what are things we should think about in terms of all this wonderful data that has been collected, that people took their time to answer questions and to think about. And if it just sits in a report, it's not going to do anything in terms of these interesting things that we've learned. So how do we think about a partnership? Yeah.
I have an idea. I was thinking as you were describing the community, it seemed to be very geographically defined. And I'm wondering if there are resources that the university has that could be useful to communities within communities. We're talking about geographically defined communities here, but there are communities within those communities that might not identify with the communities that you described geographically. And we can have more to offer then.
Yeah, so maybe thinking about understanding that there's more diversity and they're not all the same, and are there ways that we could build partnership that would be helpful to the kinds of things that the people are trying to do?
Kind of building off of that, I know with having the two entrances to the park, maybe connecting like guide communities, because you have the guides near Millinocket and T2R9, and then you may also have some sort of guide community up in the north section of the park, and connecting those two to bring them together to contribute to economic.
So really thinking about the interesting possibilities there, that who are the different groups that might not have had as much a chance to get together, and could we help to facilitate something, that would be interesting and that would be helpful. Not us telling people what to do, but providing opportunities to talk about some things. What are your other thoughts?
Have you folks asked anybody who they trust getting information from? Do they trust information from the towns, from the university, from what are the trust networks?
So good question, sort of what are the trust networks in terms of information? And of course, one of the interesting things about universities is we tend to be viewed as not a very interesting resource, but a trustworthy resource. And are there strategies or things that could happen there? And I know you're thinking a lot about those kinds of things, that they don't see us as having our own interests, except maybe we want to do research on them, which is very irritating. But that they're real, kind of thinking about who's a reliable kind of source. And there are a lot of people kind of flying in one way or another to the Katahdin area saying, we can solve your problems. And here's how to do that. Visitors, different kinds of things. And how, as a community, do you think about what are the reliable resources, reliable people? And I think one of the interesting things that we've been talking about is how do you involve the youth in the community in collecting the data, understanding the data, being really involved, so you have the development of skills on the part of the youth, you have development of capacity, but you also have this understanding of where data come from and its reliabilities and things. Other thoughts?
Based on what you're...
Can you talk loud so everybody can hear you?
Based on what you said before,
Great.
your points for the study, the one where other examples of this kind of situation, the one that came to my mind was how I know that certain towns in Maine are built on historic whaling communities, but they're not anymore, but because whaling is bad, but they turned it around, and now there's tourism value.
Yeah.
So I think that the park is a really great idea if it can be developed into like Acadia, like you're talking about.
Well, and that's great too, because it's so far back that happened, right? And so you can say, like, look, here's some things where Maine has adapted, right? This isn't the first situation. Yeah.
And there are some wonderful pieces that and pulled together about in northern Minnesota, where they turned the old mining areas now into
Mountain biking parks.
And there's also a place in Oregon,
Yeah,
where they're doing that. So kind of thinking about those kinds of issues. In an island off Newfoundland, there's a wonderful novel called Sweetland that's written about this area. That they've lost all their fishing, and so they're trying to figure out, what's next, what's going to go on. One last question. I know we've gone too long, but
Well, this is like really random. I study like small mammals and I don't really know my part of this, but I know nothing about this. But I moved here from Canada,
great.
and yeah, like Montreal is like a huge destination for people. And then I came here and I met people from like Old Town who've never been to Canada, going here literally like 3 hours away, and it's just really weird because people are like, oh, there's nothing
I don't understand how people can live this close to Canada and not go there. Like Montreal is like a great jazz scene. Like it's a huge
Yeah.
city. It's like one of the biggest cities in Canada.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. And people haven't been there. And I don't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have been outside their town. Or
Yeah.
And like, but we're so close to that.
Yeah.
But there's also like, I'm looking at a map because I
Yeah.
live in Manitoba. It's easy to get. But like here, like there aren't roads that don't go there, and like it's not like private
Yeah.
land and stuff.
Yeah.
Like I don't get it.
And part of what's wonderful, I think, about us thinking about issues like that is that interesting things are changing in sort of what to do. So we think of distance as always a barrier, but distance is really changing in certain ways. So that when you go up to the Katahdin area, people talk about, well, we're too far away from everything, so we can't have businesses here. But there are lots of internet businesses. If you can get the broadband thing, figured out, or some of the other things, so that part of what's really interesting when we all work together is to think about innovation and to think about, if it's the case that things aren't going to be like they were in the past, how do we take all the skills that we have, all the youth in the schools, all the people who are living there, and think about what's an innovative future? What's a way to keep what we care about, but to think about it in some new kinds of ways? So come and talk to us if you're interested in being involved. We've got some index cards if you want to put your name and your email address and how you want to be involved in some way. We'd love to hear from you. So what's your take home? What's one thing you learned today? Nothing. Oh no.
Wah wah.
One thing you learned.
I'm impressed with how optimistic the community is
Yeah,
in certain
yeah.
ways.
Anything else you learned?
Community complicated.
Yes. And there are lots of, I'm a community and social psychologist. People like that to be involved. Economists. Many of you are working in natural resource management things. We all need to think about how we learn from each other and work together. Evan can put all this information up there and I can say, what the heck, I don't understand half of this. But I can put community psych stuff up there and he'd say, what the heck, I don't understand this stuff. And what we need to do is think about how we work together.
Let's thank Linda and Adam.
Great.